Yes.
স্যার রেকর্ড টার্ন করার জন্য বলছিলাম।
All right. So the seminal book Orientalism was published in 1978. And after its publication, we know that there was a dramatic change of the reading of literary texts. And it was also a very important book which unmasks the hypocrisy or hypocritical role of the colonizing mission, which was called civilizing mission by the West. And after the publication of this book in 1978, Edward Said began to think about the relationship between culture and empire. And at the very outset of this introduction, Edward Said has clarified the occasion of his writing, This Culture and Imperialism. The first result was a series of lectures that I gave at universities in the United States, Canada, and England in 1985 and 1986. So this book, Culture and Imperialism, is an accumulation of the essays which were delivered in the form of lectures in different countries. For example, United States, Canada, and England. That is, Edward Said was invited as the visiting professor by different universities of these countries in 1985 and 86. Then he delivered lectures on the relationship between culture and empire. Ultimately, those lectures took up the shape of essays, and these essays are accumulated and incorporated into a book, and the name of the book is Culture and Imperialism. So Culture and Imperialism is a book of essays, not a singular essay. It is not a singular book as we usually find in the case of a traditional book. It is not a traditional book on a particular topic with a singular title. Actually, it's a book of some heterogeneous essays. Though the essays are heterogeneous, the content is homogeneous. The content is focusing or concentrating on culture and imperialism and the relationship of culture and empire. For that reason, Edward Said has incorporated all these essays into this text, that is Culture and Imperialism. These lectures form the core argument of the present war, which has occupied me steadily since that time. A substantial amount of scholarship in anthropology, history, and area studies has developed arguments I put forward in Orientalism, which was limited to the Middle East. So you cannot alienate this text, that is Culture and Imperialism, from his another book, Orientalism, which was published in 1978. So why? Because regarding the content, these two books concentrate on the same focal point. So what's that focal point? The focal point is the relationship between culture and imperialism, and how culture in the hands of the Western rulers worked as a tool of domination or as a tool of exercise of power. So culture was an umbrella term. It is not a particular aspect of the society. It encompasses the whole society irrespective of its social, political, economic, ethical, moral, anthropological, and different other aspects of a society. So culture is an umbrella term, and at the same time, empire is not only a geography. It is not only a geographical location of the world. It is the location which can be identified in the psychology of the rulers of the world, of the colonizers or the imperialists of the world. So empire lives in your psychology. If you possess the tendency or disposition to enslave the other people or the other part of the world with your own culture, that is your imperialistic attitude. So imperialism is more of human psychology than of geography. Understand? Suppose, for example, today we are not politically dominated or governed by a foreign country, but we are controlled in different ways by different institutions of the world. For example, the World Bank is still exercising its power upon us. IMF is still exercising its power upon us. Or if you think of European Union, it is also working upon us with its power and with its hegemonic disposition. So all these are imperialist practices. So Edward Said has thought about these two terms, that is culture and empire, very extensively, and he has related to his exploration of these two terms with anthropology, history, and area studies. Okay. And Edward Said has also said that all these things were proposed or were presented in Orientalism. So culture and imperialism may be called a sequel of Orientalism. The ideas that were incorporated in Orientalism were extended in culture and imperialism. Okay. And Orientalism concentrated on the realities of the Middle East. Remember this. Orientalism, that very book, concentrated on the realities, political realities, economic realities of the Middle East. But in culture and imperialism, Edward Said has expanded this subject matter and it has encompassed the whole world. You can interpret your own situation with that very book. And the people from other parts which were colonized or which were exploited in this way or that way can interpret their situation with culture and imperialism. So culture and imperialism is vast regarding its canvas, though Orientalism was not vast regarding its canvas, because its canvas concentrated on the realities of the Middle East. That is how the West was projecting an image of the Middle East and how they are imposing an elitist culture upon the Middle East, and how the elites of the Middle East are cherishing and nourishing that very projection of culture offered by the West. So, in this way, Edward Said has marked that the projection which was created by the West was also reciprocated by the Middle East in a congenial atmosphere. This is one kind of enslavement. So this enslavement intensifies the evil of imperialism. For that reason, he has written Culture and Imperialism to interpret the relation between culture and empire. So I too have tried here to expand the arguments of the earlier book to describe a more general pattern of relationships between the modern metropolitan West and its overseas territories. What are some of the non-Middle Eastern materials drawn on here? European writing on Africa, India, parts of the Far East, Australia, and the Caribbean. These Africanist and Indianist discourses, as some of them have been called, I see, as part of the general European effort to rule distant lands and peoples, and therefore as related to Orientalist descriptions, of the Islamic world, as well as to Europe's special ways of representing the Caribbean islands, Ireland, and the Far East. Actually, this is Western discourse. So, what does Western discourse do? Edward Said has said that Western discourse is trying to project a distorted image of the East. And this very discourse is called Orientalist discourse or Oriental discourse. So, Orientalist descriptions are dedicated to distort the Islamic world as well as to Europe's special ways of representing the Caribbean islands. If you think of the Caribbean islands, for example, Martinique or West Indies, some islands, if you inspect the map of the whole world, you will find some islands like dots in the map on the western side of America. All those islands are called Caribbean islands. Okay, and these Caribbean islands were the colonies of France, of Portugal also, and thousands of people or millions of people from Africa and from India went there. They were taken there as indentured laborers or they were taken there as slaves. And these slaves were engaged in very tiresome and hardy or painstaking work. And the fruit of their painstaking work was exploited by the Western colonizers or Western exploiters. So the Oriental discourse was produced by the West. Why? Because they interpreted the East as a distorted entity, devoid of history, devoid of culture, and devoid of identity. So in this way, they branded these people of Africa, people of India, and people of other parts which were colonies of the West. And this branding was done with a deliberate purpose of exploitation. The branding was done to let the world know that these people from Africa or these people from India did not have any history or did not have any culture. They are subhuman beings. So they deserve to be enslaved. They deserve to be servants, and the West deserve to be their masters. So in this way, uh, a kind of very irrelevant, inhuman discourse was produced by the West, and that very discourse was called Orientalism. And this discourse was produced not by machine or not by technology or not by their weapons, for example, the cannons or pistols or machine guns or the bombardero planes. That the discourse was produced by their books of literature. So Edward Said has said that their books of literature were to be read critically, not innocently or not naively. If you approach the literary texts of the West naively, that is without any critical approach, you will not be able to understand their deliberate politics in their texts. But if you approach their texts critically, you will find that they are projecting an image of the East or of Africa or of the Caribbeans. That very image is a distorted image. That very image is utterly a negative image. And they are doing this with a purpose. So, what's their purpose? They're doing it with a purpose, and their purpose is that they would enjoy the status of the masters, and we, the people from the East or the people from Africa should show our subjugation to our masters. So they do not believe in relationship, they believe in domination on their part and subjugation on our part. So they believe in domination and subjugation. And with this very knowledge, if you approach a passage to India, you will find the same kind of projection. Dr. Aziz, who received Western education in medical science, is not yet fit for friendship with the English people. He is not welcomed in the club, or he is not accepted by the British, or that is Anglo-Indians, in a congenial atmosphere or in a friendly atmosphere. Dr. Aziz is projected as a clown. He's a clownish figure. Dr. Aziz seems to be a clownish figure, and whatever he wants to do goes astray. It seems Ian Forster means to say that Dr. Aziz does not have the slightest capacity to manage any situation. And in this way, he wants to say that Dr. Aziz represents the Indians who do not know how to manage the situation. This is called the projection of the East by the West. And this projection is always negative. It is negative for us. It is also humiliating for us. So now let us come back to the text. What are striking in these discourses are the rhetorical figures one keeps encountering in the descriptions of the mysterious East, as well as the stereotypes about the African or Indian or Irish or Jamaican or Chinese mind. The notions about bringing civilization to primitive or barbaric peoples, and disturbingly familiar ideas about flogging or death or extended punishment being required when they misbehaved or became rebellious, because they mainly understood force or violence best. They were not like us, and for that reason deserved to be ruled. Now, I think these lines are enough to clarify what Edward Said means by the term Orientalism. So, Orientalism creates an image of the Africans, of the Indians, of the Irish people, of the Jamaican, of the Chinese. That is the people who were living in this subcontinent or in African continent or in other parts of the world which were colonies of the West. These people are represented as primitive, just mark this term, primitive, or barbaric, that is uncivilized people. Okay, so they deserve to be flogged. Flogging means whipping. Flogging means whipping. If your servant does not obey you, or does not carry out your order, then what would you do? You would flog him. You would whip him. And as a master, your action is to be justified. So why is it justified? Because your servant is barbaric. Your servant is primitive. Your servant does not know any culture. He does not have any behavioral pattern. He does not have any framework that can define his identity. For that reason, your torture, the torture that you inflict upon him, is justified. Actually, this inhuman discourse is projected in the texts, literary texts, historical texts, geographical texts of the West. Okay, this is said by Edward Said. That is, Edward Said very carefully and powerfully has diagnosed the hypocrisy of Western discourse, Orientalist discourse. Okay, so they say that we are not like them. They are masters. They have civilization, and we are primitive or we are barbaric. We don't have any civilization. And for that reason, they deserve to rule, and we are deserved to be ruled. We deserve to be ruled, and they deserve to rule. This is their justification of their dominance, of their hegemony upon the people of India, of Caribbean islands, of Ireland, of Africa. Yet it was the case nearly everywhere in the non-European world that the coming of the white man brought forth some sort of resistance. But Edward Said, who read Michel Foucault, in my last lecture, I told you about Michel Foucault's archaeology of knowledge. In archaeology of knowledge, Michel Foucault has said that knowledge is a system. It is not an abstract, or it is not an absolute uh, process of knowing. It is it is a system which has emerged out of the system of power. While the power is exercised, knowledge is generated from the place in which power is exercised. So Edward Said has said that, yet it was the case nearly everywhere in the non-European world. So we belong to non-European world, that the coming of the white man brought forth some sort of resistance. The white men came here. They exercised power. East India Company came to India, and it exercised power on the people here. They exploited us for nearly 200 years. And after 200 years, what has happened? After 200 years, the exercise of power by the British rulers gave birth to knowledge in the form of Mahatma Gandhi, in the form of Netaji Subhash Bose, in the form of Jinnah, in the form of Rabindranath Tagore, in the form of Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Michael Madhusudan Datta. So these are the products of the exercise of power. Understand, as power is exercised here, these bodies of knowledge emerged. So power goes always with resistance. Their relationship is not friendly at all. Their relationship is always hostile. Resistance always works against power, but it is the fate of power to produce resistance. So while power is exercised on a particular body, that very site, S-I-T-E, that very site generates knowledge, and knowledge challenges that power. That is called resistance. Suppose we are now questioning a passage to India. We are now questioning Shakespeare's The Tempest. We are now questioning Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. So why? Because we were dominated, we were tortured, we were governed by power. And after the exercise of power, knowledge came out. So we are now questioning this text. Why? Because knowledge has been generated from the site in which the power, the Western power, was exercised. This is called the relationship between power and resistance, and power and knowledge. And if you read Michel Foucault's Archaeology of Knowledge, you will find the same thing, the relationship between power and knowledge. Just like an archaeologist, you have to read the history. You have to know the historiography of the evolution of knowledge. And if you explore the historiography of power, then you will find how knowledge generated. What I left out of Orientalism was the response to Western dominance, which culminated in the great movement of decolonization all across the third world. We, Bangladeshis, belong to a third world country. Third world country means economically backward country. So why are we third world countries? We are third world countries because we are made third world countries. We are not third world countries. Rather, we are made third world countries. So why? Because before our independence, we were exploited. Our resources were looted or plundered, and our resources were taken to England. And the English rulers established or set up their mills and factories and industries there. So we were made impoverished. We were not poor because we had lots of resources, but we were made poor or impoverished. So if we now belong to the third world country, this third world is also a projection, is also a creation of the first world, that is the American countries or the European countries. These first world countries exploited us, and for that reason, we are now third world countries, and they brand us to be third world countries. In this way, they still make or bring about a discrimination between them and us. That is, we belong to third world countries and they belong to first world countries, and we can never be equal to them. And Edward Said has very aptly, in his Orientalism, has showed that the world is divided between two unequal halves. The world is divided into two unequal halves. Unequal, not equal. Remember this. That is, in the eyes of the West, we can never be equal. We can never be equal to the West. They're always superior. They're our big brothers, and we are subhuman beings. Understand? Even the humanists of the West believe that we are their brothers, but not equal brothers. We are younger brothers or junior brothers. This is their attitude. The biasness or the parochialism or chauvinism that are dwelling in their hearts force them to make this distorted projection or image of the East or of America. Okay. Along with the armed resistance in places as diverse as 19th century, Algeria, Ireland, and Indonesia, there also went considerable efforts in cultural resistance almost everywhere. The assertions of nationalist identities and the political rape, the creation of the associations and parties, whose common goal was self-determination and national independence. So Edward Said has said that the exercise of power has given birth to resistance in the form of movement. Suppose in our country, if you think of our liberation war in 1971, so why did we fight against West Pakistan? We fought against West Pakistan because they exercised injustice upon us. They exercised illegal power upon us. They exercised brutality, savagery upon us. For that reason, we exposed or we showed our resistance. And our resistance took up the shape of the War of Independence. So the War of Independence is a projection of our resistance. And if you think of Indonesia, you will find the same history there. because of the exercise of power on the part of the people, the populace or the people, they started a movement against the authority that was exercising power unjustly, and ultimately they won freedom. And if you think of our uh, history, especially in 1947, India and Pakistan were born. So why? Because the British rulers exercised their inhuman power upon us for nearly 200 years. And after 200 years, we decided that we would resist, or we would have, or we should have a free country, a free entity. So we started our movement, and ultimately in 1947, we achieved independence. So in this way, Edward Said has gone to history. He has referred to the political situations of different countries like Indonesia, then Ireland, then the other countries, for example, Algeria, Indonesia, Ireland, uh, and these third world countries ultimately won freedom. Now, today, Ireland is not a third world country. Remember this, because it is now living with United Kingdom under a kind of negotiation. But Irish were colonized by the British. And if you read Gulliver's Travels, you will find that Jonathan Swift has depicted how English rulers inhumanly exercised their power upon the Irish people. Though metaphorically, you will find allegory there in Gulliver's Travels. But that very book, if you read very minutely and critically from our post colonial perspective, you will find the relationship between the English rulers and the Irish people. Okay. Anyway, now come to the text. Never was it the case that the imperial encounter pitted an active Western intruder against a supine or inert non-Western native. There was always some form of active resistance, and in the overwhelming majority of cases, the resistance finally won out. Actually, this is the fate of every movement. A movement may not be successful instantly. If you start a movement today, it may not be successful today or even tomorrow. But in course of time, it must be successful. So why? Because power has got a limitation. So what's that limitation? While power works, it tries to neglect knowledge, because it is even the illiterate people say that power is blind. So why do they say so? They say so because while you are exercising power, you are so much boastful, you are so proud that you do not look at yourself, so you cannot identify your drawback, your pitfalls. As you become forgetful about your pitfalls, that very pitfalls ultimately invite the uh, people or the rebels, and they come, they challenge your power, and ultimately they will be successful. And if you read the history of the universe, of the whole world, you will find the same thing. So Edward Said, as a very powerful historiographer, has referred to the historical realities and showed that power is doomed to be defeated by knowledge or resistance. Now, come to this passage. These two factors, a general worldwide pattern of imperial culture and a historical experience of resistance against